Run to Paradise from the Choirboys on Revenge of the 80s Radio. The Australian rockers have been around since before they added the. Yes. Constants through today are Ian Hume and our guest, the band's frontman, Mark Gable. Welcome to Revenge of the 80s Radio, Mark.
Oh, look, Chris, thank you very much for having me all the way over here in Australia. Once again, the modern technology, and look at this, we can talk to one another without a problem.
That's right. Not a lot of static either. That's not like the old days.
Yeah, well, a lot of people wouldn't remember that, but yes, international phone calls weren't or was not easy.
It would be like, Mark, I can you hear me? That would be terrible.
Yeah. Come in the United States. Is that you there? Come back. Yeah.
Over. What's over? We just played Run to Paradise. It was your biggest hit. The band did start out in the Sydney area pubs, though, and it all started at your home, didn't it?
Well, it did, yeah. I mean, because it was like everything that everybody did, back then. And I mean, it was a cultural thing that started in the 40s and 50s, that pubs were, and I'm talking hotels here, where people used to go and drink, and it's what we did. Because television wasn't really a big deal. Yes, you used to watch it, but this is something we used to hunger for. So people would go out to the pubs to eat and meet and meet their future ex-wives there. And inevitably, people started, there were always music playing in the pubs and in the hotels. So invariably, people started writing original music. And so this is where we had the explosion in Australia of original performing artists, and particularly in the rock and roll medium. It was like in the 70s, it started to get really huge with people like AC/DC, Angels, and what have you. And then, of course, by the time the 80s hit, we exploded all over the world with it. And we just saw some amazing bands. And it all came out of a cultural thing called pubs, and eventually we invented a thing called pub rock. And if you ask anybody from overseas who knows anything about Australian rock and roll, I say, what did we invent? And they say, beating the hell out of an A chord. And that was it. It's like Angry Anderson from Rose Tattoo, who were stable mates of ours at Albert's production. He just, same thing. Nobody hits a guitar harder than an Australian. And I guess I don't know what it is, a lot of anger. I wouldn't call it a lot of artistic passion, but we must have a lot of something. We really beat the living crap out of our musical instruments.
But isn't that the way it should be? I mean, rock is sort of rebellious no matter where you are, and it was all different in different countries. Elvis had his thing over here, the Beatles, of course, out of Britain, of course, into the U.S. You guys had to bang on those guitars and start beating them up, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. I don't know what it was, but, like when you think about all the punk bands that have, when they started, I was fascinated because they used to had no respect for any of the confines that existed before that. And it was like we had the Eagles, we had all these, the Bee Gees, we had all this kind of music. And then all of a sudden you had a creative element that had no respect for the structures that had existed in rock and roll before it. And one thing that they did do was beat the living crap out of their guitars, and I fell in love with that. I just really, really loved that. You're right.
Mark Gable of the Choirboys is with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. How long were you playing guitar before the Choirboys formed?
Well, I started playing drums in about 1964 when I saw the Beatles, and I thought, I want to do that because it looks like fun. And if somebody had told me that invariably someone would break into George Harrison's house and stab him 40 times, and this is even before he died of cancer, and, John Lennon being shot in the back, it looked like a whole lot of fun to me. And so I thought, I want to do that. So I started playing drums, and I figured out that this is the hardest thing to do, is playing drums. So I went onto piano and keyboards, and I learned all my music on that. And then I transferred that to guitar, and I started playing lead guitar in in a kind of an acid rock band in the mid 70s. And then just after that I wanted to form a pub rock band, very much in the ilk of, the AC/DC kind of thing, or the Angels, if you're aware of them over here, or Angel City, as they're called in America, a Rose Tattoo and what have you. And I just, Midnight Oil, and I just loved it. And so it was then, because I didn't know anybody that sang, and I remember once being in the shower by myself when I was 14 and singing a Beatles song, and I thought, I don't know what I was singing. Love, love me do. I know you love me, whatever, And I thought, that's a really nice voice. So I thought, all right, I'm going to sing. And so I started singing and playing rhythm guitar, and that's really when Choirboys started from there.
You talk about pub rock. We've had a bunch of bands who came from pub scenes across Australia. What were the differences between the Sydney pub scene, maybe the Perth pub scene, or the Melbourne pub scene around that time?
Well, we talked about, before the interview started, we talked about B-52s and where they started, as opposed to, ZZ Top, right, which were more blues rock. And I think that Melbourne was more creative, more artistic and sensitive. So you had, such bands as Australian Crawl come out of Melbourne, and more that mix of pop bands, particularly in the early 80s, like Kids in the Kitchen, etc. Perth was more, and Australia has always been synonymous with tribute bands. And I think in Perth it was more cover bands. And it wasn't really till we had the Baby Animals, if you're familiar with them at all, great band, come out of Perth, that they really didn't produce anything original. But Sydney, however, started AC/DC, and bands like Moving Pictures, 1927, Midnight Oil, and a lesser-known band, which I thought were incredible, which was Tum and Chud. And not many people have heard of them, but they really were amazing, groundbreaking band. And so I think there was a lot, In Excess, of course, started in the same area that we did. So I think that there was a lot more international scope coming out of Sydney, but you still had an amazing amount of artistic integrity coming out of other towns like Melbourne and Adelaide as well, which was spawned Cold Chisel and the Angels. So there was a whole lot more. It was different all over the country, and back then everything was very different. There were certain towns we didn't want to go into because you were afraid of being killed, and Adelaide was one of them.
The mean streets.
Yeah, well, there was Newcastle. Newcastle is where Screaming Jets came from, and Silverchair came from. And Newcastle was a very tough working class town. And I remember being in one of the bands I was in the 70s. We went up to do a show, and I was terrified. I just stayed in. It wasn't a motel. I think it was a tent, but I just stayed in there. I didn't come out till we had to do the show.
The adventures of gigging before being discovered. So let's get into that, Mark Gable. How were the Choirboys discovered? Where and how did you get your first recording contract?
Well, there was another successful band who were called TMG, or Ted Mullery Gang. And they were signed to the Alberts label. Now, as I said before, the Alberts label were responsible for AC/DC, the Angels, Rose Tattoo, and eventually Choirboys, but they also had this band, TMG, on their label. Now, the drummer, somehow, I befriended back in the 70s, and just when we were trying to get the band off the ground, and he said, "Oh, look, Mark, give me a tape, a cassette." I think I've still got some of those lying around somewhere. "Give me a cassette and I'll give it to someone." And, in my complete stupidity, I wasn't sure exactly what he meant. But then I got a phone call from the infamous producer, songwriter, George Young. Now, he was a partner with Harry Vander, so they were called Vander and Young. and they were responsible for producing AC/DC, as I said, and John Paul Young, who had minimal success, but nonetheless, I think it was top 20 or top 10 in the United States. They were amazing producers, very, very clever guys. And all of a sudden, and they were also in a band called the Easy Beats back in the 60s. So I answered the phone, and there was this Scottish accent. "Hello, Mark. How you doing?" He talks like a pirate. I don't know why. And I go, "Hello," and he goes, it's George Young here. And I go, "Oh, George." And he was one of my idols. So I went, "How you going?" And he goes, Great, mate. I like what you're getting together. Come on, let's have a talk." And that was it, basically. And next thing I know, I'm sitting in this office in the middle of Sydney City, talking to two of my idols, going, we really love what you're getting together. Let's see if we can do something. And so 5 years after that, or 4 years, 5 years after that, we released our first album. And basically that's how long it took. And it was taking their advice. I said, get your live act together, get your songs together, and eventually you'll be forced into success. And we were in there recording demos in Studio One, where those first 6 albums of AC/DC recorded. And George walked in and said, "I think we better do an album, Mark," because he had all these record companies ringing him up going, "Hey, hello, has Albert's got the Choirboys signed, because they're really good and we'd really like to work with them." And so they were forced into a situation where they had to do an album. So that was 1983.
Mark Gable is with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Straight ahead, we're going to talk more about the Choirboys and what Mark is doing today on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Struggletown from the Choirboys on Revenge of the 80s Radio. With me is the frontman of the Choirboys, Mark Gable. Mark, the Choirboys have been around since the 1970s, as we've talked about, but you and Ian Hume have remained together. What kept you guys working with each other for as long as you have been?
I think it's stupidity. I think that if we were really smart guys, we'd be lawyers or something. Whenever I talk to bands that have been together for a long time, they always go, it's like a marriage. And I think we're one of the few bands that haven't broken up, particularly in Australia. Just about every other band, bar 2 others that I can think of, have broken up and reformed. And I was even talking to Ian Hogue from Powderfinger about 4 days ago, and they've been broken up for 10 years. And I go, "Come on, Ian, it's about time to get back together." And he goes, No. I said, "Come on, mate, this is what you do. You've broken up for 10 years, you've got to get back together now. All right, make it 15. But I think that I don't know why we've stuck together. It must be, I don't know. I don't want to be in another band. I wouldn't mind forming another vocal band, but I don't want to be in another band. And I really like this band, and I like the way that we are now that the original lineup is back together. I really love the way we play, and someone describes it, it's got a mojo. And I really love that mojo, and it's a lot of fun to work with. So I say it's stupidity, but I also say it's love, and I also think that it's comfort. We love doing it, so we're going to keep on doing it.
Choirboys was the first album, but the second one, Big Bad Noise, spawned, as we said before, your most successful track, Run to Paradise. It's still considered a timeless track in Australia. It was an international hit, one of the nation's best sellers overall. How did that song come to life, though?
Well, the original part of the song, which was the chorus, and it had another verse, was written in Studio 3 of Albert's, which was in King Street, Sydney. And Studio 3 was the, inverted commas, was the songwriter's studio. And I can remember sitting there with my Stratocaster and come out with a chorus, and our then lead guitarist, Brad Carr, was there participating. So 4 years later, and so that was, when was that? That was 1982, I think, or 1984, I think. So 4 years later, when we were doing the Big Bad Noise album, I went, I've got this great chorus, but I don't have a great verse to it. So I actually sat the band down and got them to play while I sang the melody and wrote the lyrics out. And it took 20 minutes to write the lyrics out. And so, but it also took about 10 minutes to write the chorus way back when. And so I just adjusted the title, wrote a different melody for the verse, and then away it went. But the lyrics in the whole song are vignettes of my upbringing on the northern beaches of Sydney. And you have to remember that Australia was always a surfing culture, particularly in the 60s and 70s. And that's when I was, a teenager and a young adult. And so it was everything that I viewed, like the part of the lyrics are, Jenny, I'll meet you at the grocery store. So Jenny was actually a girl that worked in a department store when I worked in a supermarket. And I just thought she looked amazing, right? She just, this is in the 60s, about 68. And so I got a job at the department store to meet this girl called Jenny. And so there are all these vignettes of different people and different circumstances all the way through the song about my life growing up as a young individual, a young person in Australia.
Did that ever work out? How did that go, trying to meet Jenny by getting a job there?
Well, if anybody is understanding of the Australian dialect, and it's, I guess, the closest you can do is, hey, you guy, if you're from New York, hey, what do you want? You looking for something over there, guy? What are you doing? So there is a certain kind of dialect that happens in Australia that for some parts, I didn't find attractive. Anyway, so Jenny knew that I liked it because I've been working in the department store for about 2 months, and she could tell by my body language or the way that I looked at her all the time, she knew that I liked her. And once we were behind what's called the fixtures, which was where the staff were and they would move stock around or whatever, I could see her walking the other way. Beautiful, green eyes, long brown hair, mini skirt, high heels, beautiful petite face and wonderful figure walking towards me. And she was looking at me, eyeballing me, right? And I'm looking back at her. And when she got closer, I was too shy. I couldn't say anything. And when she got close enough, she went, hey, yeah. Now, if you're Australian, you kind of know what that voice means. And I instantly fell out of love with her. Instantly.
Oh,
within half a second. Bang, gone.
Well, and you got stuck working at that place too, huh?
Yeah. Well, I had to wait till they fired me, which was a really good thing. I'm glad they did.
Mark Gable of the Choirboys is with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. So basically, when you meet or see someone, where's the point where you might think, hey, this guy or girl would make an interesting song or part of a song or one of the vignettes? Or how do you kind of get there?
I didn't think about it till like 2 decades after the fact, that I went, Jenny, yeah, that'll work, right? And then you interpret the whole thing. You interpret who she was and what she did and how she thought and her philosophies on life and how she grew up, where she came from. You just interpret it all so that it turns them into something that they never were or never would be. And they're way more romantic in the song than they are actually in real life.
I read on your website, the Choirboys website, that Struggletown, the one we just played a little while ago, was born out of a political argument.
Well, I don't know about that. Put it this way.
Or discussion. How about discussion? That's a better word.
Well, I don't think it was a political discussion. It was a cultural discussion.
There we go.
And this is on the assumption that you have the right story here. So anyway, I was at our drummer's place, or his parents' place down in Canberra, which is the capital of Australia. Very much like Washington, D.C., but smaller and more isolated. So we're down there, and his father said, look, I don't know whether you guys are interested in doing this, but we're thinking about going down to Struggle Town. And I'd never heard the term before. And I went, what? And he said, Struggle Town. I go, what's that? And he go, oh, it's Queanbeyan, which is the adjacent city or town to Canberra. And they were going to go down there for a visit. I don't know what for, because there was nothing really there. But anyway, they were going down for a visit. And I said, Struggle Town. Because never having heard the term before, it just ignited me straight away. And I even said to them, I've got to write a song about this, and write a song I did. And so from then on, Queanbeyan has become synonymous with Choirboys, partly because we wrote the song Struggle Town in celebration of the town, if you will, and because I was in Canberra at the time. And also I was born in a small town called Captain's Flat, which was another adjacent town to Queanbeyan, adjacent town to Struggle Town. And so there is that connection there. So political, I think it's more cultural. And I hope that they didn't mind too much that I popularised the town by calling it Struggle Town.
I guess these days political and cultural are lines that are more blurred than they might have been a while ago too, so I guess it qualifies.
I think it does, yes.
Mark, how did you and the Choirboys hook up with Deep Purple to open up for their Australian tour back in '86?
Well, Chris, look, I don't know how it happened. Obviously, an agent or a manager put it together, but it was a very eventful performance. And I've been doing I've just started doing shows. I've done my first one here in Australia called Great Australian Rock and Roll Stories. And one of the stories is about the tour that we did with Deep Purple. And the song, of course, that I've been doing on that show, I tell the story, which I'll tell you in a minute, of course, is Smoke on the Water. And to hear an audience going, not singing, Smoke on the Water, they're not interested in that. They will sing along to, dun, 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 dun. It's amazing to hear hundreds of people singing that. But the story is that they suggested halfway through the tour that we play a friendly soccer match with them. And this is in Brisbane, which is in Queensland, northern Australia there. And we said, yeah, sure, we'll do that. So there we are, the four of us and, two of our road crew. And I think it was the five of them, or the whole band, right? Ian Gillan, Ian Pace, Richie Blackmore, Roger Glover, and John Lord, and a couple of their road crew. And here we are playing this friendly soccer match. and of course, Richie Blackmore is a famous guitarist because of, not just because of his playing, but because of his slant on the way that he presents himself, the way that his cultural stance, he's quite individual. Now, he is the only one that actually brought with him, all the way from England, a complete soccer outfit with soccer boots, shin pads, soccer shorts, a soccer jersey, the whole box and dice. But he always stood about 30 metres away from us, even his own band, and waited for the strobe to come. But anyway, we were winning, and I was powering. Because I played soccer at school, and I was really hammering. I was really doing really well at it, and we were in front. And then Roger Glover, the bass player from Deep Purple, tackled me on the right-hand side, and all of a sudden, one of my cruciate ligaments in my right knee snapped. Bang!
Oh, that's got to be painful.
Bang! And it knocked me unconscious, right? I don't know how long for, a couple of minutes. I was lying there unconscious because the pain was so severe, I guess. Anyway, I woke up, blue sky and all this long hair, with these faces looking at me, all these English faces going, are you all right? Are you all right, mate? Are you okay? Are you all right, Mark? Are you all right? I go, oh, I don't think so. Anyway, I spent the rest of the tour, right, with my legs strapped up, singing, sitting down in a chair or on a stool.
Oh, no.
And even now, people will say, "Oh, you remember when you did Deep Purple and your leg was broken?" I go, "Well, it actually wasn't broken, but anyway, Chinese whispers, and that's what occurs." So it was a very interesting tour. And I remember, John Lord coming up to me, who's unfortunately no longer with us, and coming out to me and giving me a big hug and going, "Thanks, mate. You're a real legend and a hero for doing this." And I go, "It wasn't my voice, it was just my leg." But it makes for a great story. And, I haven't spoken to Roger Glover, and I think they were out here last year or something, touring. And I really would like to chat with him and go, "You broke my leg."
Well, they always say break a leg when you go on stage, so maybe it works.
Yes. Well, it did work, and it was a great tour, and a lot of respect for Deep Purple after that. And it was, you know what? It was better that I'd ripped out the cruciate ligament snapped the cruciate ligament in my leg, because it sent a talking point. And it taught me, people gave them something to hinge onto. It taught me something about entertainment and music. People don't remember a great show. They might remember a bad show, but what they do remember is if you do something really stupid on stage. Ozzy Osbourne, for instance, biting the head off a pigeon. I think it was a pigeon, right? And so that's what people talk about. And so when something unusual happens, that's what they talk about. And I've kept that in mind forever now.
Mark Gable of the Choirboys is with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. I'm Chris Cordani. The Choirboys and you continued through the 90s and 2000s into today with a few lineup changes. You talked about that. The original lineup's back. An intriguing album was 2006's Big, Bad, and Acoustic. It's where you mix some of your own past tracks with acoustic covers of other classic rock cuts.
Well, it was at the request of a record label here in Australia, Liberation. And they asked to do it. And they gave us money in advance to do it, so that made it really pleasurable. But it also gave me an opportunity to get things right, which was wrong with possibly the first album, Big Bad Noise. So you could sort of go, those vocals, I didn't like it the way I didn't like that way. So it gave us an opportunity to correct something or correct some things. And, that was the beauty of doing it. But it was also, it gave us an opportunity to go back to the 60s and 70s when acoustic music was very big, and it sort of had become proportionately unpopular going into the 80s. There weren't many artists doing acoustic music anymore. And so it gave us an opportunity to get back to our roots, if you will, and go, I remember listening to Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young and Simon and Garfunkel, and, all these things were incredibly important and a whole lot of fun to listen to. And it's even Creedence, right, back in the day. So it gave us an opportunity to go back to that and, express ourselves currently, but doing it in an old-fashioned way.
You also wound up doing a Roy Orbison cover with a couple of other guys, singing that Traveling Wilburys Handle with Care. That was 2011.
That's right, because a guy named Damien Leith, who became successful out of a television show here in Australia, asked me if I would do it. And I was really quite surprised because he got some other people that I would consider real singers. I've never considered myself a real singer. I consider myself some sort of expressionist or an entertainer, if you will. But people disagree. Let them disagree. And so, but it also gave me an opportunity to do a song by one of my favourite bands, of course, the Traveling Wilburys. And I mean, let's look at the culture there, for instance. Like with Bob Dylan and Tom Petty, and George Harrison. Yeah, and of course, as you mentioned, the one and only, I've forgotten his name now. Yeah, and it was like, it was a remarkable thing to do. And I actually had to go, I've got to sing this, because this was sung by real singers. And this was sung by some of the most successful people in the world. So I had to get it right. And once again, a very rewarding experience. And I made money out of it.
Chris Cordani here, Mark Gable of the Choirboys with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Straight ahead, we'll have more from Mark. Mark Gable of the Choirboys is with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. I see you have some gigs set for springtime in 2020.
Yes, we do. Now, would you like to know about them?
I think we would, or at least the audience definitely would.
All right. Well, the thing is, what we have been doing is we've been doing a thing called a six-pack. Now, a six-pack is a very popular concept in Australia because we are a big beer drinking country. People will go and buy a six-pack of beer, which is, of course, half a dozen bottles of beer in a carton, and that's called a six-pack. And so what we've been doing six-pack of our favourite artists. Like we've just done Creedence Clearwater earlier this year, and now we've just done Tom Petty, and the next one, cab off the rack, is Bruce Springsteen. So we're picking our 6 favourite songs of Bruce or Springsteen, and we're right in the process of recording them at the moment. And when you called, I was actually up in the studio running through, oh, I'm on fire, but we've got to do it pub rock style. We've got to do it Australian pub rock style. So the premise being that Bruce is born in Australia, and he walks into the garage somewhere in an Australian city, and he doesn't talk with a New York Italian accent. He talks with an Australian accent. He goes, "Hey guys, how you going? Yeah, I got this song called I'm on Fire. Here, have a listen. Oh, I'm on fire. What do you think?" And I go, "Yeah, Bruce, that's great, mate. Let's do it. So let's beat the crap out of the guitars, mate. Come on, yeah." So that's the premise behind it.
Sounds like the plot to a Yahoo Serious movie.
Yeah, it kind of does, where you interpret music that we've all grown up with. And as I said, America invented rock and roll and has created, if not the greatest, then probably almost always the greatest rock and roll that we've heard, and blues in the world. And so, these amazing artists that have come out of the country and come out of England as well, and Australia.
Yeah, look, you guys had the Underdogs and a lot of other great bands out of the 60s and 70s too, so don't sell Australia short on that one.
No, we produced some amazing artists, and for a little country of 24 million, I think, or 25 million, we've done pretty good, But we've always held England and particularly America very close to our hearts, and we always looked at America for our culture and for our jeans and our T-shirts, and even our sunglasses. So there you go.
Mark, you also have worked with an organization called Beyond Blue. The mission is to address issues associated with depression, suicide, anxiety, and other mental health issues or problems. Talk about your involvement with them. What brought you into working with them?
When I had my second bout of depression, when I discovered it was not a nervous breakdown, because when I had my first bout of depression, it was a few years before the second, and the second was far more major than the first. And I mean, to be honest, there was a lot of drinking and drug taking. My marriage had broken up, the career was not doing well, and so I decided I was going to be Australia's version of Keith Richards and see how far I could push the envelope of human existence, and take drugs and drink alcohol. Now, the consequences of that were that I had 2 major bouts of depression, and it was on the second bout of depression, and it was a week before that hit me that I was watching television, which I did very rarely in the 80s and the 90s. And of course, this was the 90s. It was about 96 from memory. These two ambassadors for this organisation, Beyond Blue, were on there talking about depression. And they were sports stars at the time. And I thought, oh, maybe that's what I had the first time round. But then a week after that, I went out on an all-weekend bender, and we call it a bender. I don't know what they call it in the States. But you usually start on the Friday, and then you go the Saturday and the Saturday night and the Sunday and the Sunday night, and you usually wake up on the Monday afternoon. And you have a series of blackouts in the course of that, so you have no idea what you did. So I woke up on the Monday afternoon, and I'd missed an appointment with a couple of my kids, but something had snapped in my brain. And so I knew that I could never drink again and that I could never take drugs again. And I even gave up coffee on the same Monday. And I called up Beyond Blue and went through their checklist, and they said, look, most probably, and they were very kind, very supportive, most probably, by the sound of it, you have depression, but you need to go to a medical practitioner of some sort, either a medical practitioner or a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and you need to get diagnosed correctly. And I did, and I was diagnosed with clinical depression, and I went on medication, which I never thought that I would do. And then it was a long process of dieting, walking, and telling myself that I wasn't a bad person, and improving. And it was then that I called up Beyond Blue and decided to be an ambassador so that I could tell people that there was light at the end of the tunnel, that there was an out, and that if you did and you had decided that you needed to change who you are and how you lived, then you could get support and you will succeed at curing yourself, or at least handling what you have in order to lead what one would consider a normal life again. And it's been a wonderful experience. And I've had people come up to me at all different parts of their lives, particularly when they're in the midst of depression or at the end of it, or helping someone who has had depression or anxiety. And it's been very rewarding to tell people and to encourage people that you will be all right if you're ready to make yourself all right. If you're ready to make yourself all right and to correct who and what you are, things will improve.
It's very important. A lot of people who have been contemplating suicide or suffer from massive depression do need the help, and it's a nice organization. There are organizations like that here in the States as well. Mark Gable, I want to thank you for being with us here on Revenge of the 80s Radio.
Chris, thank you very much for having me, and I think that Revenge of the 80s Radio is probably the most important radio show in the world. And all the other radio shows can all be rescinded and go away, and we should just have you on air for the rest of our lives everywhere, and it would be a better world.
I'd like to think that, but there are a couple other good ones out there. I mean, I like the Breakfast with the Beatles and with Chris Carter and shows like that. Rodney Bingenheimer brings up new music. He's been doing that since but I get what you're saying. I appreciate the thought, but let's play the 2011 track from you, Bobby Flynn, and Elin Kidron as part of the Damon Leith tribute album to Roy Orbison, Handle with Care, on Revenge of the 80s Radio.